Howdy everybody, welcome back to the channel, and welcome back to Automation 101, where today's class is going to be all about power. Now, our first block we're going to be talking about when it comes to power is, of course, the wind turbine. It is normally the first power generation block that people put down when they start off a new game, and it is pretty reliable if you're starting out on a planet with atmosphere. Now, planets like, well, not planets, but moons, asteroids, and even space, these things are useless because what the wind turbine goes off of isn't necessarily only wind. It is a function of height, atmospheric density, and of course, wind clearance. And that means how close is another block to it. Now, when it comes to optimizing your wind towers or a wind farm, the things that you want to look out for are how high you are off of your base, the wind clearance to it. So, when we say clearance, we're talking about blocks on the sides, right? And then atmospheric density. So what most people tend to think is the higher up I go or up on a mountain I go, the better the wind is going to be, so my wind turbines actually work better. That is not the case. When it comes to wind turbines, what you want to be is in an area with high wind. So technically, a valley or plains area is where you want to be. Now, if the valley should be a little bit lower, you actually want lowlands, valleys, plains, stuff like that. The higher you are in the atmosphere, the lower the density is. So what you want to look out for is to have either a nice open area, or even if you are on the side of a mountain, you want to build your wind turbine kind of off of the mountainside. Get away from the edge as much as possible with your turbine. So as for generation, the maximum output for a wind turbine power-wise in calm weather is 400 kilowatts. Now during thunderstorms, windstorms, the different storms on the different planets, if you're in an optimal area and you have it set around 9 blocks high, you can get in excess of 620 kilowatts. Now, how much is 620 kilowatts really? Well, let's see. We can turn that up, put a battery there, and let's go ahead and turn on one of our wind turbines. So we can see right now the current output is 93 kilowatts. Not great. The current wind speed is 77, so we're actually on the low end at the moment. And that is the top one, so that's going to give us our optimal position in this location. But our battery will be recharged in 1 day. Current input 93.11. So that's not the greatest. We have enough to maybe run a basic assembler, a basic refinery, a survival kit, maybe switching in between them to keep the survival kit online and then use the basic assembler or refinery one at a time. That can get you some decent power. Now, if we turn the rest of these on, we can see we have 415 kilowatts altogether, and our battery will be recharged in 6 hours. A lot better. That's why people will make wind farms instead of just a single turbine. And you can do that by doing something like this, where the wind tower that I've made here, you just go up your 9, 10 blocks, whatever you want. Preferably around 9 to 12 seems to be the decent range to put these at. And then you just go down 1 block and out on either side 1 block, and you can put turbines on there. Now, the optimal range for clearance on a wind turbine is 6 blocks. that is going off of that blue box you see around the wind turbine. That is going to affect the wind clearance, which in turn affects the optimum output that the wind turbine produces. And you want to be around 6 blocks away, and that's not including the one it's sitting on. So if we were to put another wind turbine, we would want to put 6 blocks in between, and then a wind turbine on the next one. That will keep the clearance good enough to not affect the energy production. Pretty simple. They're useful, easy to build. As for what they're actually made out of, if we look, a wind turbine uses interior plates, computers, girders, construction components, motors, and interior plates. All of those can be made on the survival kit. That's why this is a good block to start with. Is it something I would run a full-size base off of? No. It could help and be aesthetically pleasing, but I would not rely on this to run multiple assemblers, multiple refineries, and charge all the ships I have on my base. You would need a farm very, very large to be able to run all of that with no power issues. So for starting out, it's great, it's cheap, and pretty reliable. The one downside to wind turbines is that they cannot be used on mobile grids. What I mean by that is if you have a rover, a ship, a cargo ship, a miner, whatever it may be, these will not work. The exception to that rule is if you have a landing gear or a mag plate on your ship and you lock the ship to the planet's surface or a stationary grid, then it will work. Otherwise, it's just a decoration piece, basically. But that's it. I mean, that's wind turbines. Now, the next block we are going to be looking at is the solar panel. These unwieldy beasts and their awesome towers that you can make out of them aren't as great as some people might think. Yes, they are pretty much free energy. They're still not very hard to make. You can make them in a survival kit, and you can get some serious power out of them. The couple of downsides is one, you only get so many hours during the day to actually be able to produce power out of them because they do need direct sunlight, shadows, and anything that obscures the sunlight from one of these will reduce the power generation, and blocking it, or if it doesn't have direct sunlight, will reduce the amount of power that it produces. How much energy do they actually produce? So when it comes to solar panels, like I said, they need the sun to produce energy. You have 4 LEDs on here. As we see, they're red at the moment. Red LEDs means they're either turned off or they are damaged. Yellow means they're turned on and functional, but there is no sunlight. So that's what you'll see on them at nighttime, or if they have no clearance to the sun, whatever it may be. When they're green, they will be producing energy. And then how many green bars will tell you the intensity of the sunlight they are getting. So if you're in a forested area, or there's cloud cover, or there's a ship flying over, those green bars will go up and down dependent on how much electricity they're producing. So let's go in and let's see how much they are actually making. We will go to our solar panels, and I will turn just one of them on. Now this one, max possible output is 160, and we see our current output is about 98 to 0.31, and it's actually slowly going down because the sun is moving. And we are actually getting into a windstorm at the moment, which is good timing. So we can actually see that it is affecting the solar panels. So we're down to 3 bars, and if it keeps going, we will be down to 2. And we can actually see that difference in our menu. So we see it's at 90 kilowatts now. It's actually down into the 80s now. And if I were to go in and change the weather, just remove the weather altogether, we are immediately back up to 157, almost 160 kilowatts. Now, if we look at our battery, 19 hours. So it's still not great. If we go ahead and turn on all of our solar panels, and we look at our battery, we are now down to 1 hour. But as you can see, this is 5, 10, 14 solar panels. That is a very expensive build, considering each solar cell needs 1 nickel and 2 silicon. And each solar tower... Oops, wrong one. Needs 32 of those solar cells. Plus, they are slow to build. So it takes a while to actually build a tower like this. Now, one way we can get around having the solar panels be directly in the sunlight, or not directly into sunlight, because preferably you want them at about 90 degrees to that. Before the Automatons update, we would need to do something similar to this, where you put a rotor on a hinge, or a hinge on a rotor, and move them continuously to where the sun would be. So you would have to put in the speeds manually, hope that they're the correct speed, to where they would be facing the sun as it went over the horizon. Now, with the Automatons update, we can just go into a custom turret controller, turn it on, and have it point directly at the sun, as long as we put a camera on it. So what you would need to do is put a rotor, a hinge, put your solar tower on that, and then put a camera on the front. And then go into your custom turret controller here, and then select your rotor, select your hinge, and then select your camera, and always aim at sun. So if I were to choose my camera, I gotta show it. So if we were to choose our camera and turn it on, that solar tower pointed directly at the sun. And the way to prove that, let's roll back time just a little bit. Let's make it morning time. And then let's go ahead and make sure all of our stuff is turned on. And you can see, there it goes. Now, the one thing I recommend if you're going to build a solar tower is to make sure your hinge has shear inertia tensor on. If it is off and the sun rotates a little bit, every time it moves, you can see how much that shakes. And sometimes it just gets a little worse and worse and worse and worse. One way to get rid of that is to turn that shear inertia tensor on. It stops it, keeps it nice and steady, and is able to move nice and slowly with the sun as it moves across the sky. Not too bad. Solar towers are a very good way to power a small base if you have enough solar panels. I would still recommend going with a secondary option for power production, as solar can be very, I don't want to say unreliable, but you do miss half of your gameplay when they don't produce electricity when the sun goes down. So I would try to have something else with it. They do look cool. They can do very nice things, but it would not be my primary source. Maybe secondary, but not primary. The next power producing block we're going to do is one of my favorites to use because it actually has an animation, and that is the hydrogen engine. Now, the hydrogen engine is different than the wind turbines and the solar panels because it actually needs another material and needs a kickstart from a power source, whether it be a battery, a wind turbine, or solar panel, to actually get it going. It also needs a separate block to actually run it, which is the O2H2 generator. Now you see I only have two of these hooked up at the moment because I will explain here in a minute. But the hydrogen engine is a very good and reliable way to power a base if you do not have reactors or if you are near an ice lake. It's very useful. It puts out quite a bit of energy. If we look, the hydrogen engine's max output is 5 megawatts. That is enough to run quite a bit on your base. A full refinery, a full assembler, a survival kit or medical room, and then be able to still somewhat charge your ships, rovers, whatever it might be. Now, to get a hydrogen engine running, you are going to need a couple things. One, you're going to need hydrogen, obviously. That's the fuel source. To get hydrogen, you need an O2H2 generator. An O2H2 generator's purpose is to take ice and turn it into oxygen and hydrogen. We get the ice from either ice lakes or snow, and we're able to put it into the cargo container. So I'll put 1,000 ice into the cargo container.
Fuel critical.
And we can immediately see the engine running. The ice has gone into the O2H2 generator. If we go to our control panel and look at our engines, you can see they are still all at 0% because that one hydrogen O2H2 generator is trying to run 3 hydrogen engines. That is not very efficient. On a large grid, like a base or a large rover, a large ship, one hydrogen generator can run one hydrogen engine efficiently. And we turn off 2 of our engines. Let's go ahead and put another 1,000 ice in there. We can see that it's actually filling up that one hydrogen engine a little more. Now we do need a constant supply of ice because that little bit is not going to get us very far. When it comes to the amount of ice you need, it depends on how much you're going to be running your engine. So if you have your engine off for quite a long time, you can let that O2H2 generator just keep building the hydrogen, and it will eventually fill up that engine. So if we go ahead and we put in, let's say, 100,000 ice, that O2H2 generator is only going to be able to carry so much. So what we can do, so when it actually fills up the hydrogen engine, if we turn that back on, When that gets to 100%, it will actually stop producing hydrogen. So our O2H2 generator that's actually running is putting out 55% of its inventory is full, and it is current power usage is 500 kilowatts. So that's how much it's using from the battery. And its output H2 is 500 liters a second. A hydrogen engine can hold 100,000 liters, but it's also going to be using 500 liters a second. So this isn't ever going to fill. So what we can do to kind of start storing some of that hydrogen is hook up a second hydrogen generator. And what that will end up doing is allowing that hydrogen engine to actually fill while still using, because now we're producing twice as much as it uses. Now, when that gets to 100%, both of these generators will stop producing. They'll just kind of pause where they're at, and then they'll continue as the hydrogen engine uses it. One thing we can do is put down a hydrogen tank. We'll just do that. And then we'll also go ahead and hook up our third O2H2 generator. And I will do that. And let's just add a fourth one just to ensure that we have enough, right? We want to be able to fill that tank. So this is the normal setup for the base that I normally run. I'll have 3 hydrogen engines,
Fuel critical.
and then 4 O2H2 generators. That's enough to power quite a bit on the base. If we look at our battery, it will be fully recharged in 22 minutes. So far, the closest we've gotten to is 1 hour, I believe. So that's actually very, very good. Hydrogen engines are a very good way to run bases. They're very good to run um, ships, rovers. They're a very good power source. The only downside is the added blocks that you need for the inventory, the hydrogen storage, and the hydrogen production, as well as all the conveying you need to do on a ship. It's not much, but it does add some bulk and weight to the ship, which we all know means you need more production and more energy. Now, the other downside to hydrogen engines is you need a power source to kickstart them. Whether you build a battery first, whether you use solar panels on your ship, or if you're on a base, you use solar panels or wind turbines to get them started. Because even though they produce their own energy, the conveyor systems, the O2H2 generators, they need power to actually do their job to get the hydrogen to the engines. So that's the only downsides, really. Other than that, they're a very good way to power any type of grid, and I would definitely have them as my number 2 and my main source of power until we get to our next block. And that next block is going to be our old reliable, the hard to come by, and love to hate reactor. The reason I say love to hate is because you need uranium for this. Same concept with the hydrogen engine, that it does need an inventory spot and a source to actually power it. That being uranium, uranium is the hardest thing to find in the game, ore wise. It's only on asteroids, and It does not come in very much. Thankfully, you don't need much uranium to actually run a reactor and to get a lot of power from it. Now, when it comes to reactors, the amount of energy that you get from uranium is it exceeds the amount of the hydrogen engine by far. If we look at the reactor in the control panel, there it is. Its max output is 300 megawatts. Where if we look back at the hydrogen engine, which was our most yet, it was 5. So when it comes to reactors, they are definitely the go-to, the end game, and the one size fits all for power production. Now, they do take a little while to actually charge things. Um, their power output is a lot, but normally what ends up happening is you have one reactor powering a full base or a full ship or something along those lines with all of these production blocks, all of these weapons, all of these uh, the cockpits, the thrusters, and people end up relying on that one reactor a little too much and then wonder why their batteries actually take longer to charge than if they had a mix of solar panels and hydrogen engines and all of the other stuff that can produce power. So, what I recommend if you have a reactor, also use solar panels, hydrogen engines, and wind farms. Build them into your base to where they make sense, they're usable, and maybe if you go with a reactor, you can get rid of the hydrogen engines, but keep the solar and wind farms because they don't cost materials to actually get them to run. There is a way to see how much uranium you're going to need because, like I said, it's not very common. You can only find it on asteroids, and it's still pretty rare to find it there. And its veins are not very big as well. So, to figure out exactly how much uranium we need, we can do a little bit of a math problem. It's simple algebra. I know, blasphemous, doing math in a video game. Just shoot me now. But it's very simple. I'll show you how to do it. So, what we can do is actually this U equals T times P, where U equals the uranium we need, T is the time in decimal hours, which, for example, 1.5, and P is the power that we actually need. So let's say we want to know how much uranium we're going to need to be able to run our ship or base or whatever for a full day cycle in the game, which is 2 hours. Now, let's say our base, when doing nothing, consumes probably about 1 megawatt or 2 megawatts. But when we have an assembler running, 2 refineries running, 3 O2H2 generators, and all of our lights, as well as charging our ships, let's say that uses 10 megawatts. So we will put in here 10. So that is actually going to give us an answer of 20 kilograms of uranium. Pretty simple, right? Let's say we want to get a little more technical. So the uranium we're going to need is going to need to power our base. Say we're building on a server, right? The server doesn't shut down, whatever it happens to be, or it even restarts, but it keeps going and time still runs in the game while you're out doing stuff. You're at school, you're at work, whatever it happens to be. You can actually figure out how much uranium you're going to need to power your base and everything while you're gone and be able to come back. So let's give it a rough estimate of, let's say 7.5 hours, right? I don't know how long your workday is. Mine's about 10, but whatever happens to be. 7.5 hours, and your base consumes, let's say, 4.6 megawatts, right? And then we're going to multiply that together. And that is going to give us an answer of about 34.5 kilograms of uranium. Now you see what I mean by not needing much uranium to power a base. 34.5 kilograms is nothing compared to ice, to the solar panels and the wind farms. Because if you look in here, I have 10 uranium. That's going to last a long time. So, one thing we can look at is 1 kilogram of uranium at 300 megawatts lasts for 12 minutes. That's an easy way to look at it. So, if your base or ship, for some reason, you have it large enough, it uses all 300 megawatts. It will last 12 minutes with that 1 kilogram. Not terrible. Actually, it's the most fuel efficient and the most power producing block in the game. But it is also the most expensive. If we look at them, they need the steel plates, computers, and motors as normal, but they also need superconductors and reactor components, which can only be made in a full size assembler. So you're not going to be getting a reactor at the beginning of the game, unless you're in creative, which you do you. But this is definitely an end game block, and it's also probably the one I rely on not the least, but I don't use them very often. Mainly because uranium is so hard to come by, and yes, you don't need very much of it, but you still need to be able to find it. And if you're playing on a server, that one spot can be depleted very quickly, depending on how the admins and the owners of the server actually set them up. Those ores can be filled in every X amount of hours, whatever it happens to be. But then you're also not doing in ground bases, but there's a whole thing about that in another video. So, that is our power production blocks. In a ranking, I would probably say my favorite to use is the hydrogen engine. Ice is usually very easy to come by, it's very easy to get, and it doesn't take much to actually get those up and running and keep that power production going. Yes, they produce 5 megawatts, which is quite a lot when it comes to smaller bases, especially starting bases, or even smaller, like forward operating bases for combat and stuff like that. They're very productive. My second favorite is going to be the reactor. Upside being it produces the most power out of anything by far, but it also needs a lot of things to actually get it. You need the most rare element in the game to be able to use it. And you also need to have a lot of space for it. Small reactors, not so much, but when you're putting them on a grid, like a base or something like that, they do take up quite a bit of space. Other than that, my go to at the beginning of every game is going to be wind farms. It's usually reliable. Unless I'm starting on the moon, you can almost use them anywhere. You don't have to worry about the sunlight going down and being able to charge your batteries before the sun goes down. They produce power even in the crappiest of elements and crappiest of locations. You can usually get a wind turbine up and going, no problem. Solar panels, I mainly only use them for aesthetic purposes. They do produce quite a bit of power, more than the wind turbines in some cases. They're easy to use, but they are fragile and they are unwieldy. I mean, they are massive. So, even on ships, they're very, very big. It's hard to kind of use them in a proper way without building a solar tower or building them into a wall somehow. Um, now that we have the turret controller that can actually target the sun at all times, it works out nicely. But they are still solar panels. I mean, they're not anything fancy. So that's it. I hope this helped you guys out, and I hope this gave you a little more clarity on how to use these power blocks, get some power on your bases, and be able to charge those batteries. It's not very hard. You just got to kind of have an idea of what you're doing, and sometimes a little bit of math goes a long way. Hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll catch you in the next lesson, and we'll see you in the next episode. Have a good day, everybody.